We might as well begin. Cheryl's on a timeline on tomorrow night. We have a building committee meeting, and we had a lengthy meeting with the building committee last night, or chairs. Last night, Cheryl and Ann and Dr. Fred and Bruce Hampson. And, we were given some assignments, and she's been working on those, getting ready for the meeting. We're going to be talking about the options tomorrow night. The other thing is I have some information, and we'll put it out.
I should probably call a meeting to order, just in case somebody's watching.
Sorry.
I'd like to call the January 29th meeting to order. Has everybody had a chance to see the agenda?
Yes.
Motion to approve the agenda?
Second.
All in favor?
Yeah.
Gary, you have some opening comments?
I do. This is an aside. We will have an announcement we'll be able to make this week with working with my public relations department on indoor air quality. So we're making some real progress on that in terms of dates on the retesting and the independent firm to do the comprehensive review at North Coastal. So we'll stay tuned on that front. Also, lest you think that my meteorological skills have completely evaporated, this morning's decision was not a journey into madness. I received the dawn patrol call from the police department in the town indicating that they had no salt to deal with the rather slippery road conditions. As you know, there was some black ice problems, and so we erred on the side of caution. So fortunately, we weren't criticized too roundly, as far as I know. But we wanted to let you know that was the reason. In recent years, as some of you know, we've held multiple board, administrative, staff, team study sessions prior to bringing the budget to the board for approval the first meeting in February, which is the first week in February. This year, as you know, we met on December 19th and again on January 9th. And last Thursday, in the not-so-warm confines of Middlebrook School Auditorium, I presented the superintendent's proposed budget for the hearing, and the board had a chance to hear comments from the public. I know you've also received some letters, some emails, letters from the public on the budget. I suspect there'll be more as time goes on. Excuse me. In planning conversations for tonight's meeting, talking with Bruce, we arrived at several objectives for this evening. One was, I beg your pardon, I'm struggling with my asthma. Haven't been. My doctor was off last week, so I didn't get to do it. We would like to have the opportunity to discuss, as needed, response to the questions we received from the board. We did send you some written materials. There may be questions, follow-up questions on that, which was perfectly fine. Another piece that I said we would walk through this evening was a piece on class size, and Bob and Donald and Rich are here to walk us through the thinking about class size. As you know, we have 3 FTE positions recommended for the high school. They'll talk about what that means and implications for reductions in that request. A second objective was to continue have the board continue with some discussions relative to some of the questions on the budget. For example, what's the board's position relative to whether or not we will have participation fees included in this budget. As you know, the board assumption was that with the initial budget would not have it. There may be more discussion tonight about where you are at this time on that question. The impact on the budget, which, as you know, this year we had budgeted $6,500. We're tracking to see how that turns out, whether we hit our number. We have one more season of sport, the spring season, so we'll know then. But all by all, our estimates and our sense, we've not seen a decrease in participation this year. So we project that we'll hit that number. The impact of adding the budget, the $176,500 to back into the budget would be 0.22%. So 0.2%, and it would reduce the budget as it stands at this point. And then finally, a third objective, or not finally, but a third objective in anticipation of the fact that the board, and based on some of the conversation we've had and the column from the table, notes from the table column, each year the budget, there's a movement from what the administration may propose and what the board ends up feeling comfortable with. So in anticipation of that movement, we would like to review some. The team, leadership team has spent time looking at, carefully at the budget, looking at areas where we might make some reductions. We'd like to review with you some of the reductions that we think we are recommending that you consider. And I'll have Ken walk us through that part. And then finally, and arguably most important, and on some levels, is determine if there's a reasonable comfort level that you have with the proposed budget, and if not, to identify areas where the board feels you need more information in order to make a decision. I think we all would like to avoid going to a meeting on the 6th of February and making precipitous or hasty decisions about budget at that point. We'd like to have that be a night where you're talking about what you think about this budget, why you can support it, or how you feel about it either way, and use our time that way rather than trying to make determinations about what should happen with regards to the numbers before you. So those are the objectives we have, and then other objectives may emerge, and we're pleased to try to do the best we can to respond to them.
Good. You'd received a number of questions from us. How are you going to address those through the conversation?
We can. I emailed those. Again, we were up against
Did
it.
you get it today?
We'll have copies. I
It
apologize.
was the other board event that got it.
What's that?
It was the other board event that got it.
But you know, this is the second time this has happened, so I'm thinking there's something wrong with my BOE thing, and I didn't check to see. But let me give you a copy.
Go check the outbox.
Karen and Gil.
Yeah, Karen and Gil, where are they? That's a good
Karen's
point.
on reading them.
As we go through that, I'd like to find out from each of you if there's any other objectives you'd like to cover this evening. We've got a couple of hours blocked out. I don't know if it's going to take that much time. You want to start?
Yeah, I think the only thing that I had, I was surprised when we had our presentation the other evening that there were some shifts in the numbers from what we had last spoken about. And when we last met here, there was movement in the numbers. In fact, an increase, not significant, but some increase in the numbers, which surprised me. And I'd like to understand more about how that came about and what those the drivers were in those numbers. So if we can, and I don't know if you will address those in your other comments. You said there have been some other adjustments in the numbers, so maybe that'll all roll into it. Because
Can I, by way of clarification, Mr. Emily,
Yeah.
Are you talking about the number in the not capital and non-recurring?
No, I'm talking about, in our January 9th presentation, our total increase was $3,547,000. In the January 17th presentation that we made at Millbrook, the number had jumped to $3,672,000. So
It was the
IFU.
adjustment from 4.66 to 4.82.
well, I know what the drivers were and what happened there, because I can't. There was a $15,000 increase addition that you made in building operations,
Right.
okay, but that was offset by a $42,000 reduction in employee benefits. Employee benefits were down by 42. Building operations, remodeling major repairs went up by $50,000 from the previous presentation. And there was a $35,000 increase in salaries. And so I was surprised by that we were above what we had talked about at our last meeting. So So what makes it, how did that come about, and what made up the other differences there?
The $35,000 increase in salary is an increase to the budget for the threat assessment coordinator, because as the job description developed, it was determined that this really was a much more experienced and highly credentialed and qualified individual that would demand a higher salary than a more or less entry-level teacher, was what we originally put in there before we had properly developed the job description.
Okay.
There's $50,000 in the non-recurring site work and $50,000 total in contracted repair services for as contingencies for indoor air quality, either testing, monitoring, or remediation.
Right, and that we noted, that was up in the 13 to 63.
Right.
Okay.
So, but there shouldn't have been any change in the health benefits.
There was a $42,000, it was $42,000 less on the benefit line than what we'd been shown on January 9th.
I'll have to look into that, Mr. Emily. I don't, because the total budget only changed by the $135,000.
Right, but I can't get to 135,000, so that was my issue.
I'll have to look
Yeah,
into that.
okay. I tried to get to the 135, I couldn't get to it.
Again, I apologize. I sent this at meeting today, and I didn't
okay.
check to see, did it put board in? No. Like you said, maybe it went to another board. The questions that were sent, we've categorized, Molly has helped format this a little bit for us. We have other questions in special education. As you can see, there are some questions, a question on security, staffing. There were questions on athletics, technology, facilities, insurance, and there are some achievement data questions, and just an additional information. I misspelled additional. So it was a great day for me.
Okay, Chris?
I think given the agenda that Gary's outlined, along with this information, that's fine with me.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. We can proceed on that.
Okay, the first item we wanted to talk about was that's referenced in this memo, is class size, and then we've asked Bob and Rich to kind of walk us through some of their thinking about class size. We know that majority of our salary and our cost of our budget is in salary and benefits, and so the FTE numbers obviously become important, and it's important for you to understand what we think. We initially proposed, I think high school initially proposed 4. We had reduced that to 3, and then Bob and Rich are here to talk about what that means and what it would mean where we could not to reduce beyond that.
Thank you, Dr. Richards. The question that was posed to us was, if we do not add headcount at the high school, what would the impact be to class size and which departments would be affected? So that was the question.
Okay.
And the response is, as Dr. Richards said, we had requested originally 4.0 FTE based on our mathematical models of what we felt we need to keep class size in check. We did make a reduction to 3.0 certified FTE that we presented to the Board of Ed. And the main data point here is that if we do not increase headcount at all, meaning no increase in certified staffing, so current certified staffing levels, the certified staff to student ratio would rise to 16.15. 16.15. And as a matter of perspective for the board, the previous current highs for class sizes were 15.61 in both 10-11 and then 11-12. So that was the previous historic high. Our current ratio this year is 15.48. So that, I think, provides a little bit of perspective. The question that you posed was important because you asked which departments would be affected. And the clear answer is that in the high school models with pre-registration and sectioning and master schedule building, all of the departments invariably would be affected. You'd have to have increases across the board. It's not as if you were just, cutting a teacher in one grade level in an elementary or a middle school model. So the impact would be across the board. And Rich and I did take the opportunity to look at how that would impact the individual departments. And I have some data on that. I can provide a couple of examples. I don't know if you'd want it in every department, but if you were to take science, it would go, currently at 20.1, it would rise to 21.3, the average class size. Well, I'll give you the core areas. We'll start there if you have. That would be helpful, I think. Currently in English, 19.5. It would be projected to rise to 20.2, the class size average in English. In mathematics right now, we're at 21.9. We would rise to 22.8. Science I gave you, I'll just repeat it. It would go from 20.1 to 21.3. Social studies from 22.3 to 23.1. And we'll, in considering world language, a potential core area, 21.6 to 22.5. Now, although the data suggests, in my view, incremental increases, when you start talking about 1,373 students with current staffing levels, the implications at the high school, in my view, are much more monumental than incremental. And I thought what I could do is just share a little bit of, my qualitative data perspective on how that would impact it, try to put a face to the numbers, if you will. And we've discussed with the Board of Ed over time the importance of differentiated instruction, meeting students' individual needs, teaching to students' learning styles. And if you have that few more students in your class, that does present more of a challenge to meet students' individual needs. We know that based on differentiated instruction that's expected right now in current 21st century skills and what we would expect. We are running right now a very tight master schedule. We've had incremental cuts over the years due to budgetary constraints, which we understand. But right now, there is very little flexibility to make schedule changes, including the very needed changes that students may need. And it is also a challenge to make required level changes, meaning a student is taking, for example, an upper level math class and is not meeting the mark in that course and might need to drop down. And you find yourself in scenarios where you're making decisions. Do I put this student, as an example, in this biology class and raise it to 24, or in this freshman English class and raise that? So the point I want to make is that every one of these scenarios that arise, when it's very, very tight, it impacts class sizes one way or the other. And we don't have the flexibility we have previously to just say, okay, there is room in 3 sections and we'll make the best choice and balance it out. So that's just a reality of where we are. Fundamentally, if you took the same number of students that we have, if you took the same number, the anticipated number of students, 1,373, and loaded them into the same number of sections, you're just going to be maxed out. And it's going to be that much more challenging to really accommodate students' needs that arise. So that's just a reality of the master scheduling process. I think it's important for the board to know, and I know you do know this, that Wilton families, rightfully so, have a very high expectation for the level of service that they receive. And we try to provide that level of service to our students and to our families. And when I talk about level of service, the things that come to mind are communication, responsiveness, availability for extra help, additional instructional support. There's a ceiling for how much a high school can absorb to still try to provide that level of service. And as principal, I want to continue to be able to do that for our students and our families. I think they deserve it, and that's what we want to try to keep doing here. I think the board understands that the reality of the implications when I talk about the master schedule is that you will certainly have, we will certainly have, you know, we're all in this together, we'll have more outliers. We will have more classes that gravitate up towards those maximum ranges. You know, I think we do a great job. You've heard me say that we make a very cumbersome and technical process as scientific and as mathematically based as we can make it. But even with proper balancing, you have classes that gravitate up higher. If we were flat, you know, without the 4 FTE or the 3 FTE, we're going to see more of those outliers, the 29s, the 30s in different areas. The 23s, the 24s in English classes, we're trying to focus on literacy skills. So those are just some examples. The other thing I think that we've talked about at some point is the number of students that we are all working with in all of our buildings, the increasing numbers of students with social and emotional concerns. And our teachers and our staff members are on the front end of recognizing those concerns, addressing those concerns, referring them to the appropriate staff members, whether that is the school counseling staff, the administrative staff, the school social workers. I have a concern about that level of individual attention and recognition and intervention that we would hope to continue to provide as we absorb more students, and we can't wait to welcome this large class. We're excited about it, but we want to meet their needs at a very, very high level. And then, as an example, you know, when we talk about, this is just one example, you know, when we talk about the writing process and developing literacy skills across the curriculum, but certainly in English and social studies and these content areas, if you were to envision, for example, an English teacher who, you know, you may look at the data and say, well, there might be one more student in each class, but it won't be perfectly balanced in spite of anybody's efforts. So if you take an English teacher who, you know, who would receive, for example, 8 more students and is grading 8 more essays and trying to develop through formative assessments and fundamentally good teaching and developmental literacy processes and skills, I have a concern about our ability to do that very well for all of our students with these important skills. So those are some of the initial, more qualitative features to what a flat or no increase might represent in our school, and that's a pretty thorough answer to the question. I think at this point I'll stop there.
What are some of the largest classes now?
That's a good question, Mr. Likely, and you asked that. You know, we have, Dr. Sanzo did a good job in world language this year, avoiding the 28s and the 29s in world language and social studies, but you would have to envision some of those classes gravitating in that direction. We try to limit our freshman English classes to the 20 range just because the students make this very important transition to the high school, and we want to meet some of the aforementioned needs and develop some of the aforementioned skills. So would you probably see freshman English classes gravitating into 23 and 24 ranges? That could happen. I'm concerned about science classes that we endeavor to keep in the 22 range because we run, you know, very complicated in labs and we just want to focus on student safety. You would see science classes gravitating towards 24 and 25.
I think, excuse me, Bob, I think the question, if I understood it, was where are we this year? Do we have some outliers this year that are, maybe Rich? Are there?
Yeah, we do currently. There are some specific classes, many of our math classes.
Yeah, we got
right
a letter
now.
from someone today. His son had 26 in his math.
Yeah, there are a few right now, Algebra 2 classes that are 27, 28 students in those classes. There are a few in world language that are in the 26, 27 range. There are a couple in our area studies courses that are up at that high level right now. So there are outliers, but they are increasing, particularly as we try and meet the individual student needs as inevitably students do require some changes to their individual program of studies, that results in changes to the class sizes, and we certainly try and meet their needs, but class sizes can gravitate upwards.
I'm sorry, Rich, with the science classes, I know one of the concerns we've had is the number of lab stations that each science class has, and I think they're pretty much maxed out at 24, if my memory serves me, or maybe not, maybe less. Have we got sections there this year that are pressing that? Because I've been in labs in some times where we have these outliers where you instead of having 3 kids at a station, you have 4, and it's just not feasible, or it's not, a good thing to do. It's not good practice.
That's accurate. There are right now some physics classes that are in the 22, 23 range. We do have some physical constraints within the building, within our culinary arts program, within our world language lab, that put some physical constraints on the sizes of the classes that they can be. And there's some other examples too that we could cite.
Rich or Bob, can you explain to us, if you hire, let's say, one of these new hires as a math teacher, how does that help class size in an English class or a science class? Unless you're, obviously it's easy to imagine you hire a science teacher, now you can add new sections and that reduces, but how does it affect the other subjects that you didn't hire directly for?
Well, that's a good question. We have these complex mathematical models based on 3-year enrollment percentages of students and where we would project the students. Essentially what we would have to do is, depending on what FTE increase we have, we would have to incrementally add teachers. So you can be in a scenario where you're looking to hire part-time teachers in a number of areas. Where you're looking, the first thing we would have to do is look at what part-time teachers do we have right now who may be able to go closer to full-time. We've looked at some of that already hypothetically, but it's not as if you're just hiring a math teacher and they're going to be dual certified to teach English language arts. It doesn't work that way. There would be incremental additions, and it would be an interesting and challenging and pretty complex process to make sure you're putting the additional FTE right into the right spot.
Right.
So there are a number of variables and considerations to make that happen.
Thank you for clarifying that, because I think, even the public would need that clarification, that you're not talking about 3 specific brand new individuals necessarily. It may not even be any new employees per se to the district. It could potentially just be increased time of current employees.
You're making a
or
good
some
point,
combination of that.
Yes.
There's another side to that too. That's great clarification. But my understanding is the way the scheduling works at the high school, and I'm going to learn next year. Actually, 7 o'clock tonight. as a matter of
You're
fact.
learning today. Yeah.
Is that if you add another math section, that gives more flexibility in scheduling,
Right.
so that
Absolutely.
a child may not have to be forced into a larger math class and may have some more flexibility in getting into a smaller English class because the timing schedules work out. Is that accurate?
Yes, I
So adding a math teacher
Potentially,
could
right.
conceivably help this English scheduling.
could open up scheduling implications in the other content areas. That is accurate.
Okay. The other thing that I want to point out for our viewing public, there's nobody here besides us, by the way, so we're speaking to the people at home. It's really it's really misleading when we talk about averages, because there's a fraction of the town that's going to look at 20 students versus 21.3. So what? Just add another kid in there. And the reality of what we're talking about right now is that's not the case. We're worried about, at least I personally am worried about that world language class or that social studies class
Right.
that's pushing 29 kids.
Right.
That's an
Right.
awful lot of work. And if you've got a struggling learner, and we
Yeah.
keep talking about the middle tier,
Yes.
Yep.
our
The
B
middle.
students,
Yep.
they're the ones that are going to get hammered in a class of 28 or 29 kids. I was not a world language specialist by any means as a student. I took 4 different ones. I never did really well in any of them. The thought of being in a class of 30 kids, I promise you, I personally would have been lost.
Mhm.
Math, algebra 2 at 27, 28 kids.
Crazy. Yeah.
If a kid isn't a math wizard, that's going to be really tough for a B student. It's
Yep.
going to help make that B student a C student.
Yep.
So I get where you're coming from, and I think talking about averages helps, but really focusing on the impact at the high end is really where the rubber hits the road.
Bruce, if I understood the points you just made, though, were you describing outlier classes that exist today, right, those numbers?
Right.
So rather than having a conversation about not increasing headcount to make sure that we don't further exacerbate the problem, I'd like to understand what we might do to improve the current situation. So let me ask the question another way. What's the optimal class size? Is there a consensus in the academic community around the optimal class size? Because Bruce has just showed you that 27 or 28 is unacceptable, and I'll take that as a given. So what's the right number? Is it 22? Is it 18?
At the high school level, yeah.
I mean, my fear is that we are currently substantially at substantially higher or lower coverage ratios, depending on how you want to describe it, than we really ought to be. We're quite a bit away from what's optimal.
That's a good point.
So is there a consensus in the academic community? What's the,
I can share
Bruce
with
has
you-
told you that it's 27, 28 is too high. It sounds like it's radically too high to me, but I don't know.
I can tell you what the research shows. There seems to be a significant impact on achievement when classes are below 15 or above 30. Anything in between, it seems pretty even. However, I would qualify that most of that research has been done at the elementary level. I'm not really aware of a lot of studies done at the high school level.
So what does this group think? This group that's experienced in teaching and educating high school students over a very long period of time in a terrific school district, or a series of terrific school districts. What's your sense? Where do you think the optimal class size is for some of these high school programs? And you can differentiate math from science, from world language. That may be different based on subject matter. What would you recommend to us, the laypersons, as to what we ought to do?
Firstly, I want to just reinforce the point that you made. We have gravitated up, to your point, to Mr. Likely's point, compared to where we have been. The question you're asking at the high school level, there's not a single average class size, because it really depends on the content area. You know, we try to keep the English classes lower to work on, as I said, on literacy skills, meeting students' individual needs. Our social studies and world language and mathematics classes, we section a bit higher. It also gets more complex because if you take the mathematics department, we project the number of FTE, and then we have to look individually within the department and look at the level of needs. We would section the math classes for the more challenging learners quite a bit smaller than those for the middle tier or the upper tier. So within each department, there are considerations and so many variables to consider. And you'd find a body of research out there, but I don't have an answer to what the ideal class size is. I could tell you what we target in each department, but it's not a simple response to.
If you were unconstrained, what would be your proposal?
If we were unconstrained right now, we would seek the 4.0 FTE, certainly. That's where we would start. Well, ideally, we would try to limit English classes at 22.
And why 22 as opposed to 20?
Well,
what do we pick up? What's the improvement in education if we move from 22 to 20?
We cap freshman English. We try to cap freshman English at 20 to work with these students making the transition. English students, we try to cap it at 22. You could make the argument either way. Yes, we would rather have them at 20.
Could we demonstrate we were delivering a better educational experience?
If you talk to our teachers, they could sit here right now in those two chairs and tell you why it would be a better educational experience. I have no question about that. Yeah.
I came out of a system, one of my assignments, superintendent, and it was a system where there was such a strong and a very high achieving system not far from here, that where they had English teachers, high school English teachers teaching 4 class sections instead of 5. And so it really, and they've had very it's a very high achieving school district. And I think that spoke to the amount of writing. I think the challenge that all of us have, and Bob mentioned the importance in the language or the language arts classes because of the writing, but in reality, we've been pushing literacy and more writing in all of the disciplines. And you mentioned social studies. I think science has components of writing, and even mathematics, as some of the assessments now are asking students to write about their thinking process. But I really felt that we having 4 sections as opposed to 5, there was a great deal more opportunity for teachers to assign writing and to have the time to really do a quality job of critiquing the writing and coaching, and doing a lot more of the coaching in the classroom. And I think that makes a huge difference to be able to get around in a classroom. I think the other variable, I think I may have mentioned at one of our work study sessions, is the whole issue of how the class is and Bob mentioned the different levels, whether it's more of a remedial class or whether it's an advanced class, is how some of our sections, because of constraints, we've had to have a level 1 and 2 level students in the same classroom. And I think that can affect, because there is a certain amount of differentiation that has to occur then. And I mentioned, I think, being in a math class, observing a math class last year, where there were, I think, 25, 26 kids, and I think the teacher said there were 6 to 7 kids who had IEPs or 504 plans, which required differentiation as part of the contracts that the IEPs present. So that makes a difference too in the composition of the class. But I think a lot of it has to do with how do you vary the activities, how are you able to get around, as Bob said, to the students, and coach with them. I think the facilitated type of learning model is very different than what many of us had, where it was the sage on the stage lecturing, talking at us, and we were dutifully taking notes. I think the whole instructional model is so vastly different, and that requires a lot more. It's a lot more effective when you have a number like 20 as opposed to 27. You simply can get around to the groups more. So
But I would also add that I think we've been getting very good results by keeping the ratios the level that they are. It would concern me, I think it would be a risk to start pushing the envelope there. I think you also benchmark against other districts, other high-performing districts like us, and you can see that they keep their classes within the limits that we have been keeping as well. So I think, does that kind of get at the question here? I don't know that we
It's
have
getting to
any
it. My
clear-
sense is that we've been increasing the class sizes for several years, and
Yes,
my
it's-
anxiety, and I'm just, you tell me, because I don't know, but I wonder if we ask the teachers, and whether it's your collective opinion, that over time, the quality of the education we're delivering is degrading, because we are attempting to educate more children with fewer professionals.
I think that's a fear that I think we share. And that's why we've really tried to track, and we've kept the 20, you've seen in the class size report, the 20-year ratios, because we do think that's important. And I know that there was some, last time I made this statement, one of you challenged it, which I think that when people talk about quality private independent schools, I think that many of them place a real premium on individual, and you ask parents, well, why would you go? I always get a little defensive when I have parents who've had their kids outplaced here in town, and I say, why would you do that when you have such a great system? And they say, well, because my kid can get more individual attention. Constantly, some of you have worked in independent schools, and again, there may be some classes that are higher, but they do. I've had friends who've been counselors who have 25 seniors that they write recommendations for. How many seniors do your counselors write recommendations for? They have 70, 60, 70?
Yeah, they're gravitating towards 200 right now in their overall caseload, so
Right.
65, 70, 68.
Yeah. And I think that's an impact too on the getting to know the kids, and that's an advantage in the schools that staff at a smaller ratio have. Are the kids known? And I think that's really something we're striving to do here in Wilton. I think our teachers are really committed to that, And I think they've done a great job of trying to do that. And I think as it gets bigger, it's harder to know each kid in the class.
You know, I think that that's a very valid and excellent point that we should be talking about more, is it's not just a class size issue, a subject matter issue, but it's the social, emotional development and well-being of the children too, and the ratio of staff to students. And it can even, from that perspective, fall under the security umbrella a little bit, just as the school psychologist does. So I think that's an interesting point.
You know, just, I agree. I think just that what Bruce was saying about being in a class of 30, I was, in one of the areas of disciplines I was not as skilled in. I liked 30 because I could kind of hide in the crowd. And I mean that, because in getting around to, we look to see as we evaluate teachers, are all students actively involved in the learning process? And I think that what happens when you gravitate higher and higher, and if teachers are not as conscious about making sure that they're working everybody, you can get people who, and I've watched classes where some kids get through the whole class without having to get involved in what's going on, and that's the kind of learning that we're promoting, and it becomes more difficult to engage, particularly when you're discussing a piece of literature. You have 27 kids, and you don't get every kid doesn't get the same kind of airtime, and we're trying to structure it so that no one is able to be passive.
Right.
And there's some people who want to be passive.
Yeah, I think someone made a comment earlier about the reduction in teacher and staffing at the high school level over the past few years. Can we quantify what that's been? I mean, have we gone from, we're looking at the 2014-15 budget, at the 2007-8 budget, what did we have here in teaching staff, and have we gone down to a point now that we've got to start coming back? And I think it would be, can you quantify what those reductions have been over the past few years, perhaps?
Yes, I can. I'll go back to the heyday, if you will, Mr. Hemley. So in 08-09, we had 15 students to a certified staff member. Okay. Now we're talking about, as I said earlier when I started, 16.15. So there are obviously there are more students to a staff member. To Mr. Strout's point, I was not being facetious with the 0.4. Right now at 15.48, if we added the 0.4 FTE, we would be a bit restorative in class size to 15.42. And if we had that FTE available to us, we could, with our staffing models, register the students and get into our sectioning and then make informed decisions so that you're allocating that FTE to maximally meet student needs. That's our charge. So, there were trend lines down, peaking out, as I said, in 11-12 and 12-13, where we were not staffed as well, and it's either going to go in one direction or the other right now.
Well, you haven't added staff. There haven't, as enrollments, and I think that was the part of the question that Mr. Hurley was getting at, is we can go back and look at, here was the enrollment that year, we didn't add any staff, so
Right.
it's going to float class sizes up.
Or we reduce staff year over year, and I guess that's really what I was trying to, has there been a reduction in staff that has taken us to the point we're at today, where we now need to reverse that trend? And I think there has been at the high school, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, there has.
Were we at 73 FTEs, we went down to 68, and then we went back.
Once again, 08-09, 86.51 FTE. Okay, the following year, 85.33.
Okay.
The following year, the big hit, 81.95.
Right.
So that's what I was
Slightly
trying to
restorative, 11-12, yeah.
So there has been a steady decline that, now we got to put the stake in the ground and say, all right, enough. We need to really look at what we've done and where we're headed.
Yes, and we're anticipating, obviously, this increase in students over a year trend line here. Yeah.
One, you had said ideally, though, you wanted 4.0 FTE. What was the cost difference to the budget when we go from just one FTE at the high school? What's the cost difference?
$60,000.
60, okay. That's all inclusive, benefits,
Well,
everything?
since at the high school, you would be adding, points
Not a
here and
person,
there,
right, yeah.
it's not a whole body.
Now I
so
understand
wouldn't
that.
add benefits in.
So 60, okay, thank you.
Any other?
I think that's good, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, actually, one other quick thing. The change in student populations in the high school next year versus this year, what is that?
We're at 1373, up 57 students
Next year.
next year.
And 1373 is next year's forecast?
Yes, that's our projected enrollment based on the LNS assessments
Thank you very much.
in this class coming in.
We have a very large 8th grade class.
Yep. And I'll reiterate something that you mentioned last week that we need to continue to reiterate. Ellen Essman's calculations and projections are phenomenally accurate 1 year out, maybe 2 years out. We really cannot look at them beyond 2 years. It's critical that the town understands that, because there's a lot of people in town that are looking at it saying, we're going to have, this massive reduction of several hundred students. Well, the reality is, we're not seeing that. And next year's population is identical to this year's population. Part of the challenge that we're facing is that students are growing up into the high school, making the high school larger, yet at the same time, we're having additional, I'll say, special services needs in lower grades, which is why we're seeing the requirements not dropping in the lower grades. So I want to make that clarification.
Bruce, is it not possible to get credible estimates out 5 years?
Yeah, we had a board meeting when we were doing Ellen's projections. Was that before we
It was
transitioned?
October, it was
Okay.
October 30th.
So what we found out at that point from Ellen is that there is another, and Dr. Richards supported, there's another set of research that we can do that will give us the broader visibility, and Dr. Richards has already, we've given him direction, we wanted that information, and he's already started that process. So
We
next year we'll have
actually-
something better.
Actually, Molly, we made contact, and we have Dr. Peter Prouda's projections. I haven't had time to go through them, but we've just recently received them.
Oh, you do have those?
We do have them, and we'll get, what I need to do is work with Molly, we'll get Ellen a copy of those, and we'll share what we've seen from his work. Because he takes a slightly different view of some things, and I know historically, over the years, when he was at the State Department, districts would sometimes look at his projections and then do their own internal ones and then compare them. So we'll have something to look at. Now, Ellen was really hoping that we would do that, so we jumped on that.
Good.
We have it.
Okay, thank you.
If there are no further on the first part, one of the issues that we wanted to get some direction on is the board's position relative to the participation fees. And I know that's been over the years been an issue where we've gone round and round, and as you know, the assumption this year was to not do a budget. I don't know what your thinking is at this point about that. So
I think we ought to go around the table on it and get people's perceptions. I'll leave it at that before I give my own. Krishna?
Can I ask, what's the administration's recommendation is to not assess the fee?
well, historically, the administration had argued against participation fees, and the board, I think, was of two minds on the issue. Ultimately, I think we got to a point last year where the situation dictated that we were going to have X amount of money, and we made a decision to try to stem the tide with the participation fees. I think some people supported them, holding their nose, but we nonetheless did that. And I think the high school has done a good job. Ken has done a good job in managing the mechanical aspects of collecting the monies. I think Ken's done a sensitive job of dealing with the people who have needed waivers so that has not been a problem. Participation has not been a problem. So at this point, I think many of us have felt that while we philosophically have some significant reservations about it, when you look at the alternatives in terms of what further cuts we would need to make that would impact some of the things we're just talking about. And although it's not a huge amount of money, I think a lot of these little numbers add up to a bigger number. So I think at this point, we're somewhat resigned to it, I think. But we wanted to find out.
But does the administration have a recommendation? I mean, what's the basis for it? Is there a moral or ethical objection to these fees? I just don't understand what the debate is.
Well, I think the debate, and others far more eloquent than myself have put it forth. I think that many of us view that the co-curricular activities as a part of the total school experience, and that it should be the responsibility of the tax dollars to pay for those. I think with regards to athletics, one of the big problems I see with it is I think it represents a special tax on parents whose youngsters are participating in athletics. I think philosophically, I think it's a real slippery slope that I think the board has agonized over this, because it could start out at a level and it could be, well, gee, we're another tough budget year. This is my 27th year as a superintendent. I'm waiting for a good year. And I think that
I hope
not. But I waited too long. But I think that it's very easy that number to increase over time.
Are you surprised that there wasn't much of a negative reaction from the community?
Well, yes and no. I think part of the thing we heard from enough parents when the board looked at the possibility one year we were looking at cutting freshman sports, and the superintendent's public hearing, which has had as few as 5 attendees, that year had 150 attendees of mostly male gender who were arguing the merits of athletics. So I think a lot of the arguments we heard that night when we were at North Driscoll that night was the fact that they felt they were already paying for athletics through the recreation programs over the years. So for them, and when they looked at the pros and cons of losing programs, they said they'd be willing to pay for the program. So I guess I'm not surprised. I also think it was, at this stage, modest enough. My big fear is that, as I said, we're going to get leveraged, and people are going to say, well, gee, just raise it to 125, and then it's 150 a sport. And I think all of a sudden, then you're going to really have people feel that.
You mentioned sports a couple times. It's more than sports. It's all
and co-curricular.
Right.
You know.
So let's be clear on that. It's
pretty
much everything after the bell rings.
Right. The sports are the biggest part of the dollars that we're receiving from them, but and the part for the clubs is that it's I believe it's an all-you-can-eat, right, for the club part. As opposed
Does the
to
current fee include theater at the high school?
I'm sorry?
Does the current participation fee extend to theater programs?
Theater club, but there are theater courses that, of course, are curricular.
Like the senior show or the spring play?
I have to look into that.
Whether they pay $50 per, I don't think they're paying $50 to participate in the senior
Sure.
show. Yeah.
To be fair.
No.
I mean, to be fair, they probably should.
Well, we're sponsoring, they've asked for donations from parents for the senior show, which we
Well,
support.
But they do that with every sport
Whereas
too,
like
so.
the band is a class,
It's curricular.
it's curricular.
Yeah.
Are there any music programs that are non-curricular, jazz band, all that stuff?
That's all
Is
curricular.
curricular. Just curious.
And what is our fee structure again right now?
100 for a sport and then 50 for clubs and activities. And clubs and activities, as Dr. Richards said, you can participate in as many clubs as you choose for the
At Middlebrook, it's and Cider Mill, it's 25 for the club program.
And I forgot, it's $100 per sport,
Per sport.
per student, and then we have a family
First
cap.
season.
No, we have no
No.
family caps.
And I guess there was a lot of research done at the time
Right.
that this was put into place on what other communities are doing.
Right.
So we have that research, you know, were we in line, were we below other communities that were charging participation? I would think we were below.
My recollection is that we were just below the median.
Yeah, we're below the median. And certainly I understand the concern. I think I don't know if we've had conversation with any of the booster organizations to see what the impact has been on their fundraising efforts, which, you know, could have been impacted. A parent
Right.
says, well, in the past I've supported the boosters, but now I've got to pay this participation fee, so forget the boosters this year, I can't do it. And the boosters do supply a tremendous amount of support for the athletic programs here, a tremendous amount. You know, football is, you know, tens of thousands of dollars a year that went into the football program at the high school from the boosters. I can say we did not see a fall off, but maybe some others did. I mean, the football players and parents still, I think, are strongly enough supportive and will do whatever it takes, you know, and will pay the piper to support the program. But maybe some others were impacted negatively. They didn't do as well in their fundraising efforts because of participation. I don't know what the answer to that question is.
I think another answer or response to your question that I have a concern about is that parents, and having had 3 daughters who are athletes at the high school, is the fact that in addition to the participation fee, and some of you have been there, they're also paying a lot for their equipment. I was amazed at how much a piece of aluminum with a string net on the end cost down at that place in Norwalk. At that time, it was $125 or $140 for a lacrosse stick, and I thought that was rather.
Just spent
You know,
$300
you look
on
at
a
the
new
cleats, the
baseball
number of
bat.
cleats that we have, the
So-
number of other pieces of
They
equipment.
cost $300 for
And I think
baseball.
that adds to the parents' cost too.
But it is surprisingly less, we're charging less than what we paid coming up through youth programs
Right.
to participate.
Right. Travel's not good.
I mean, you know, if you.
We can talk about Walter Schock.
Well, yeah. So there is, you know, I don't think we're unreasonable in what we are asking in terms of the level. The question is just, it is, as you point out, 2%. I mean, but it is, in perspective, $180,000 is 3 full-time teachers at the high school.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay? And that's, you know, I mean, here we are talking about how do we rationalize the difference between 4 and 3. Okay, and $180,000 is 3 FTEs at the high school.
Last year, my position was, and it remains this year, is that philosophically, I'm absolutely opposed to participation fees. I just think in public education, they just play no role, and somebody recently told this group that it's not real revenue. And I think $176,000 is, you know, 0.22%, it's not real revenue. We were backed into a corner last year, as we all recall, and so I'm one of the ones, as Dr. Richard says, held my nose and jumped in, because I felt that at that time there was no other option. I don't know personally if we're there yet in this budget cycle. I'm a strong supporter of the budget as it's presented. In fact, I'd like to see the high school get its 4.0 FTEs. And I think that there is, based on emails that I've been receiving from the public, I think there's a growing support among the population against the Board of Finance 1.75, and I think that there are people out there who are ready to fight that and say that we've been at that level for a while now, and it's time to start doing some rebuilding. And I think that this is a budget that starts us on that path. So I think at this point in time, I would be opposed to implementing them again. And I think if they were to be implemented, what I would want to see differently this year versus last year is I would want to see that dollar amount to be specifically earmarked for something. Like, for example, if we put it back in and we project 180,000, then I want the public to know that 180,000 is going to be spent for X, Y, and Z versus just blended into the budget and we don't really know the benefit of it. That's my thought at this time.
But what if they don't raise the $180,000?
Right, well, yeah,
You fire a teacher halfway
Exactly,
through because
right.
you don't get your 180,000?
right. Well, that's why I think it's a revenue stream that can't be counted on, and it's one of the reasons why I'm not
Well, I think
in
that's the
favor
reason
of
maybe
it.
you don't earmark.
Oh, okay.
So it's a very technical matter.
Yeah. Yeah.
But to use the $60,000, if the
That's it.
community's gonna pay
Right.
this $180,000 one way or the other, and we are, and we did, if we pay through real estate taxes, the federal government gives us a $60,000 subsidy. If we pay through participation fees, we don't get it. So if $60,000 is important, if we run it through real estate taxes, and the community's paying for this
Mhm.
one way or the
Mhm.
other,
Mhm.
we get a subsidy from the federal government. Last year, we didn't get it.
It's an interesting perspective.
That is your 60 grand. Pays around
The,
15.
the challenge with that, though, is we're putting that $180,000 burden on perhaps a portion of the community that doesn't feel that they're participating in the benefit of those extracurricular and sports
Of
activities.
course, that could be extended to many of the services that are provided by the town.
Right.
I
and- well,
don't
and that-
disagree with that. And
Okay.
the challenge that I'm wrestling with personally is this is an incredibly difficult budget year. Last year was actually easier.
Yeah.
I'm proud of this budget. There are a
Mhm.
few little pieces in there that I'm concerned about. You know, I mentioned one of them. I think we can probably hold off on a new golf cart. I know Laura Schwem had expressed concern about adding girls golf at this time. And I respect that position. I think we could probably hold off on that another year. You've made a compelling case for adding another FTE.
Right. I'd rather do
Yet
that
at,
than go
yet
for
at the
it.
same time, I see what's happening in our town. I understand the numbers of the people, and that a 4 or 5% increase on property taxes can be devastating. And the problem is it adds year over year over year. And I've been in town 20 years. My property taxes have doubled. You look around at our neighboring communities, and we have a mill rate gap challenge that Wilton is facing relative to Westport, relative to New Canaan, relative to Ridgefield, and that's causing a problem with our property values. And people are actually looking at that. I've heard people say that. We don't see all of the negative emails that the Board of Finance gets. Warren and I agreed today that we'd start sharing those, so I think you'll start seeing some of them. It's intriguing to me that when somebody supports the Board of Ed budget, they send an email to the Board of Ed.
Right.
And when they're against it, they send it to the Board of Finance. So, I mean, we need to be looking down both sides of the pipes to understand it. My feeling is that I don't like the concept of participation fees. I agree in a fair and free public education, but I understand the challenge that we're in, and I think we lose a fair amount of credibility with the Board of Finance if we go to them without including something that we included last year. We are going to appear tone deaf, and they're going to take it out of our hide anyway. So we have a stronger position with them and with the community, sharing with them that we understand what they're telling us and that we therefore need to move forward with it. Now, one of the things that I would like to do is I'd like to implement participation fees, but I'd like to put that FTE back in at the high school. So it would mean dropping our budget by $110,000, but adding that FTE back in
Could
at
we
the high
look
school.
into whether or not we could extend participation fees to theater groups, non-curricular
And
based? Band is curriculum. non-curriculum.
But they do so much stuff after school hours though, right?
But it's part of their grade, they have to. That's mandatory part of,
Marching.
part of the course. That's the marching part of
I
marching
believe the
band.
original intent was to include the theater productions, if I remember correctly from the discussions last year.
Okay. So for right now, let's assume that it's probably already being done. Is that safe?
Probably should be done at least, yeah.
Should
Okay.
be.
The show is, same
Okay.
show's Fridays. That ship may have sailed.
And,
Well, we're in,
If
yeah.
we could just check.
But that raises a question if there's other clubs or any other activities that have slipped through the cracks possibly.
So, I mean, there's no question, we're not gonna get to 1.75. I mean, you'd run the
Right.
numbers,
No.
and it's about $1.4 million, $1.5 million
Right.
that we'd have to cut out of this
Right.
budget. That would be a decimation
Yep.
of our school district, and I can't support that. I mean, I firmly respect and understand the 1.75 and the vision for it, and the need to close that mill rate gap. I don't see it happening in 1 or 2 years. I do know that in communicating with other board members of other towns, we are not in this boat by ourselves. Westport, I believe, is looking at over 6%. I believe New Canaan is as well. So I think we have a budget we can be proud of with a few adjustments. And I think going to the town, telling them that we've looked under every rock, which includes adding back in participation fees, adding back in the additional FTE, does a reasonable job of addressing both sides of our complaints. Your budget's too high, you're cutting
Class sizes,
education too
right.
much.
Exactly.
So I would throw that out as a point for discussion. Questions, comments? Is that something you can support?
I would support that if it meant the 4.0 FTE at the high school.
I'd like to reserve my opinion. I'm not yet convinced.
Okay, well,
And at some point in time, I'd love to better understand the basis for the Board of Finance's recommendation. If it's a principled recommendation and there's some basis for a particular increase, then we might be willing to negotiate against it. But I've been through enough negotiations and understanding that just by suggesting a position that's not particularly reasonable and then sort of agreeing to split it in the middle is, it's a blatant attempt to achieve a particular result that's not really the right way to go through that negotiation. So if the Board of Finance has a basis for their 175 that's principled, I'd love to hear it.
yeah, I don't believe we're going to see that information.
So I don't then feel particularly compelled to respond to
Right.
what the Board of Finance thinks is the right way to spend money to educate the kids. They represent the same folks we do in town. So we don't have to worry about our credibility vis-a-vis that board. We don't have to worry about being tone deaf to that board. We have to serve the broader community and to educate our kids.
Well,
Agreed.
I respect that. And you know, my comments of tone deaf to the Board of Finance also means tone deaf to a portion of the community that thinks the budget's too high.
Fair enough. Let's have that conversation.
The challenge that we have.
Because we don't get that feedback, to your earlier point.
Right.
And I spent a fair amount of time several years ago looking at the communications that were delivered not just to the Board of Ed, that you all get, but also to the Board of Finance.
Right.
And the overwhelming communications to the Board of Finance were still supportive of the Board of Ed's educational priorities. So I'm going to be interested, because the only information I get is what we all get as Board of Ed, and every single communication is, as you point out, positive with 1 or 2 exceptions. I'd love to see the communications to the Board of Finance, because last time I did the checking of their own records, because that's all subject to public review, most of the communications received by the Board of Finance was positive. Nothing. There is certainly a group that would like us to spend less money.
Well,
I know some of them, and I understand it. I wonder, though, whether there's a different way to collectively raise the money that's a little more responsive and nuanced, right? There are different approaches to raising money and allocating the burden of education to be a little more responsive to the fact that certain people have lived in town 35 years and are on fixed income, and 5% increases in real estate taxes are difficult for them to manage. We can talk as a town about more grants to seniors, more grants to lower income households, maybe grants that are tied to tenure in town. Imagine a situation where if you have a certain income level and you are a certain age and you have a certain tenure in town, there may be some relief from real estate tax increases. I think you might get, because that's just going to shift the burden of real estate, of the spending to those of us that are still working and have kids in the school system. We may have lots of people who support that kind of a reallocation. So there may be, maybe the Board of Finance can spend some more time thinking about how we raise the money as opposed to just declaring a particular increase as the appropriate increase. There's no way to skin this cat. To be responsive to those seniors that are struggling.
And to the students we need to educate.
Yeah, we can do both. We have the ability. We certainly have the affluence in this town.
Well, you know, I think just one piece that I recall, I've lived here only 20 years, but is that there is the pay it forward consideration that those of us whose kids have gone through the system have a responsibility to help the current generation of students the way those who preceded us helped us when our kids were coming up and we were doing all the improvements to the schools and so on. So I really think that's an important thing that we need to keep reminding, that it's a responsibility, it's a community responsibility, and it's something that we do pay it forward, and I think that gets lost.
I agree with that. Just some people just can't afford it.
Right,
And,
I recognize
and if we
that.
want to retain the character of town that we have today, we need to find a way to keep those long tenured residents in town. We can't drive them out of town
Right, I
because
agree.
of the cost of living and real estate taxes. So maybe we have to have a more progressive tax system. It's already progressive because the real estate taxes are a function of the value of homes, right? So to a degree, we have a progressive tax system. But there's no reason why we can't make it more progressive. And then tax more heavily those that can afford and are consuming in favor of those that, you know, have been here 35 years and can no longer make the same degree of contributions. So there's maybe a way to reallocate the burden. And we can satisfy those that have kids in school that want to see the school systems, you know, invest more money, and satisfy those who think that we're profligate in our spending. We may be able to do both.
You know, I think it's a fair debate. It's one that needs to
Not
be-
today, we're not going to solve
Right.
the issue today.
Right. I'm not sure. I don't know if it's solvable in this budget season, but it's worth bringing up.
It'd be nice to have a 5-year plan and talk about how we're going to spend and invest in education over the next 5 years. Then we could have a conversation about how to tax systems over the next 5 years.
Right.
It brings up another kind of longer-term discussion that's been brought up before, which is that the combination of Board of Ed and town services, human resources, finance, other aspects. And I think it's something that we as a town need to start looking at some point. I don't know how and when we get into that conversation. It seems that we never really get into the heat of it until we're trying to split the same nickel 6 different ways. And we have that with the security task force as well. And we've had emails flying back and forth about our school resource officer and what portion of that school resource officer, the new one, is in our budget versus the town's budget. And there's been some miscommunication and misunderstanding on that. And Ken, if you can clarify, I believe right now the new school resource officer is in our budget prorated for 181 days, is that correct?
Well,
No, the entire amount is in our budget.
we checked, and I talked to the police department today about the resource. Rich Ross spends, Sergeant Ross spends roughly 80% of his time in the school his calendar year. And in addition to that, and I know this for a fact because I work with him and Bob and the high school staff sometimes in the summer months on student issues. If you have student discipline issues or if there are activities that have gone on that have implications for discipline that the school will have to deal with during the school year, we deal with Sergeant Ross. Some of the training that goes on is in the summer that relates to his work here. So the number of the 181 days is a portion of that, but he also goes beyond that in the summer months. But it's about 80% of his time.
Okay, so you're saying right now, though, the new incremental SRO is 100% in our budget?
Correct.
people in town that think otherwise, but our information is accurate, theirs isn't. That's what it comes down to.
Yeah, Bruce and I were talking about this the other day, and I think one of the things that we talked about as this was emerging from the task force was the fact that it needed to get out on the table, the concept of additional security support. And then I think it's all the same tax dollar when you think about it. I think it was felt to at least get it on the table, and then it could be determined whether it rightfully should fall in the school district's budget or the town's budget, albeit the same tax dollars that are going, whether it's in their budget or ours.
But what's the thinking on separating them?
Well, and again, one of the things that's different when you get into these issues, every town, Connecticut, a land of steady habits, is that districts do fund things differently. For example, in some districts, the resource officers are totally funded by the school district. In others, they're funded by the police department. I don't know, I couldn't tell you what the breakdown is. In some schools,
Some are split.
Some are split. Nursing services, some towns pick up the entire amount of the nursing services in the schools. Others, it's in the school district budget. So,
And the Security Task Force presented the recommendation to the Board of Selectmen on Monday night for the additional school resource officer. But the Board of Selectmen has not had a budget discussion about whether they have the desire to put that officer into the police department budget yet.
The police commissioner came to me and asked that we put 181 days of that person in our budget, which is where that number came from.
That's the first I've heard of
Well,
that.
can
We can
push
certainly
back
adjust the
with-
figure
Right.
if that's the agreement. We can certainly make the
Well, I
adjustment.
think there's concern that it's being double counted, but if the
Well,
chief of police is saying that it's not in his budget at all.
that's what he said Monday night at the Board of Selectmen.
So
meeting,
for
that it was not
town
in there at all.
purposes, it's not being double counted, which is good. Okay.
So it would be their employee in our budget?
Yep.
Would we have any control over him? Could we give him other assignments?
Teach a math class.
We keep
I mean,
it
no.
Just saying, he's our
I
employee.
think that one's gonna be an ultimate decision, at the Board of Selectmen, Board of
You know, it
Finance.
seems all
It's all the same dollar.
security should be
How
paid
it
for
plays
by the
out.
police department.
But all of that security, and how Clark spoke to this the other night at the selectmen meeting, all of that should be separate from any targeted increase that the
He made that point, yes.
Board of Finance was making. That it should be understood that this is a one-time bump in the budgets, whatever budget it's in. And that should be
Well, except next
recognized.
year, when it's folded into our.
Right, it gets
budget,
folded in,
people-
right,
people
exactly.
forget that
It's there, but now it's folded in.
we've got a
into-
right police now.
Mhm. But it's a one-time bump, yeah.
So we still need to, we need to give the administration some final direction on what to bring to us to vote on next week. And I thought we had some directional leanings. I'm not sure that we have that at this moment. And it's not appropriate for us to walk into that meeting next week with them wondering what we're going to do. So
Well, can you
we need to
go-
continue to sit here and hash this out so that we have a better guidance for.
yeah, we really
administration.
do, I appreciate that. One of the things that may help, or I hope it doesn't muddy the waters here, but is one of the things we looked at, knowing the challenges that we face in putting together a budget, and the fact that, as I said, it oftentimes moves from what the administration has recommended to what the board ultimately approves, and then it may move, hopefully not, but it could move in a downward direction based on the action of the Board of Finance. We did look at, the administration looked at some possible reductions and that we believe could be undertaken that would have the least impact. Every I think time you cut it has an impact on the school programs and services, but we'd like to at least share that thinking with you, just to show you what might be something that you could consider. I think we've tried to keep, in past years, we've tried to keep this discussion away from, when I've seen boards get into the weeds on arguing about volleyballs versus tennis rackets, literally. And I think we've tried to say what kind of policy direction you want to give us as to what the level is, and are there some non-negotiables that are key things that we must come forward with the budget. That helps us formulate it, but I'd like to have Ken kind of walk you through some thinking that, or some reductions we looked at with our leadership team sitting around this table.
I'll walk through the list, and then if you have specific questions about specific items, the building principals can respond to them. Point 4, specials teachers at Miller Driscoll. Those are areas that haven't really been reduced as the enrollment's been going down, so Cheryl believes that she can make some reductions in that area and still maintain the quality. Point 1, reduction in career practicum at the high school. Point 1, reduction of phys ed teacher at Middlebrook. Reduction of the staff development instructional leader at the district level, which is $15,700. Supplies for the career practicum area at the high school and the school nursing supplies, totaling about $2,000. A little over $3,000 in staff training at the high school. 55 curriculum days, 40 at the high school and 15 at Middlebrook, totaling about $12,500. Reduction of 4 clubs at the high school for about $13,000. $5,000 in furniture at Middlebrook. Moving out the ceiling tile replacement project at Cider Mill for $20,000, and eliminating some of the additional buses for the high school testing days for about $2,000. So that totals a little over $109,000, which, as you can see, they all come out of the part of the budget that is not security or special education, and reduces that portion of the budget from a 3.1 increase down to a 2.92 increase, and reduces the total budget down to 4.68.
And if we put participation fees in on top of that, it would drop to 2.7?
It would bring the
Right.
total budget down to
4.46. But it would bring the adjusted budget, excluding sped and security, down to
probably around 2.6.
2.6.
Can you give us some details?
Sure.
Like, what are the 4 clubs at the high school? Do you have them?
I would say this, we looked at the enrollment numbers, and we've identified 4 clubs that are under enrolled. I've learned not to, I'd rather.
What's under enrollment?
The figures were quite low, but I would rather talk to the club advisors and the students first before because they're under enrolled clubs.
10 kids or less, or?
Yes,
Okay.
they're low.
Other questions on the?
What Chris was asking me about the participation fees and adding back in the FTE at the high school, we're just guessing that 4.68 would drop to 4.46, but then when we add back in the FTE, it'd probably go back up to 4.5 for a total number. Ken, I don't know if you can run those numbers that fast.
But Bruce, what were those, you earlier identified, I think it was 3 different things, like the golf girls.
Yeah, they're symbolic. I mean, unfortunately,
But I mean, what do they total up to?
yeah, I don't know.
Oh.
I mean, to Gary's point, I mean, I was chuckling when he was saying volleyballs because I was thinking golf cart in my head.
By the way, I think we really, I'm sorry.
No, please.
I really think we need to be very careful about the golf cart issue. That is not a golf cart that one would take onto the first tee at Riviera to.
No, I've seen it.
But no, let me clarify, because, and Bob, I want to make sure I'm saying what my understanding is. It's a cart that we use for the trainers who are dealing with making sure students who have been injured in athletics are transported, and gets them from Allen's Meadows, where you might have a track or kids running, to the Cider Mill campus where you have other kids playing sport, and they're constantly taking kids and putting them on the cart if they've had any kind of injury that is not to the point where you need to have an ambulance. It's not unusual to see them taking the student up here to the building so the parents can pick them up. So that's my understanding and they literally are, we run when you look at the order of magnitude of our program, it's a small college athletic program. And in a day when we're really talking about student safety in lots of areas, this is my understanding is that this is what this is about.
We need one reliable golf cart for the trainer and for medical purposes. And what we spec'd out was one with the bed on the back that also the seat could flip up so you could seat a couple of students in the back as well. But we need one reliable medical cart, and right now the two golf carts. I respect the perspective on
It's a perception issue. I
Yeah,
will
that's what I
admit.
want to clarify.
And
On the golf carts.
It's a medical
The
cart.
medical-
It's
we should
not
be
really
going
a
to golf
cart.
carts.
It's a medical cart.
yeah. But we need
Right.
one good reliable one is what we need.
Transporting cart.
Right. Does that mean we can get rid of the other ones?
Well, our discussion today was, and recently was, to what extent could we trade the old ones in for what they're worth? And we're going to look into that. You're raising a good point. We'll look into that.
Sell them, yeah.
Yeah, trade them in on the new one. We were
Yeah.
debating, can you trade one in, and can that offset the additional cost for the medical piece on the back that would secure the students safely if they're transported?
But isn't there still a need to have some way of getting people around all the venues, the athletic, some of the people that are making sure that the officials are there, that there's proper supervision, that you have bus issues or whatever, I watch them as I'm standing at my computer, whipping by all afternoon, going around. So I think that it's not that those are luxury vehicles for, purposes that I think they're important for the supervision of a very active program.
It is.
I just look at the cost of, how much is this medical cart that we're talking about?
The one we looked at online today was $6,700. The athletic director McDougal's been doing the research. There are varying levels, and you can buy a used one. This one is not a brand new one that we looked at, and so the other prices in there, you see the $4,600, depending on what a regular, one's a medical cart, but what a regular golf cart would be to transport the athletic director and the site directors who set up before the contest. I'm proud to say that athletic director McDougal does a lot of walking out there, and he feels that's important to make it to the different venues, but if he needs to get one from one place to the other, he would need to do so. And the site directors, the assistants who are making sure that all the materials are there that are set up for the matches and the contests, that needs to be in place so when the refs arrive and the away teams arrive, we can start on time.
Yeah, at some level, this is a laughable conversation because it's an $80 million budget. We're talking about a $6,700 medical cart. But we're weighing it against the three priorities that Dr. Smith laid out of nice to haves if we could afford them in our last meeting, which is more professional development time, more collaboration time, and more technology. And we're cutting curriculum days. And I'm having a really hard time, understanding if we're looking at it at this level, where are we going here? Because I feel like, sure, we're robbing Peter to pay Paul, but maybe we're spending money on the wrong things too. And I can't help but wonder if that medical card could be covered, could be acquired some other way. You know, whether it's through boosters or something.
Donation.
I don't want to be quoted on it, but I had thoughts. So, I go back to the fact that we need to provide some guidance here. I see $176, well, I'm going to say $116,000 sitting out there that the community has already expressed a willingness to provide. I understand your point on property taxes, I do, and I think that's a worthy conversation, but I think it's a longer term conversation that we can have here and now, so.
Can we agree to get to it after the budget season?
Yeah.
Get a subcommittee of the Board of Ed, subcommittee of the Board of Selectmen, and subcommittee of the Board of Finance, and start to think about different ways to
I would-
spread the cost.
I would absolutely agree to support that.
And then, how do we feel about the fact, since the community is going to pay the participation fees one way or the other?
Right.
It's gonna be paid.
Right,
We really are giving up $60,000 the federal government will give us.
right.
That, you just can't escape that. That's real money.
It-
It's more than $6,700 for the cart. I was thinking segways though, instead of golf carts myself, maybe cheaper. And if people took bicycles like the police departments do, that would actually reduce the health premiums, health insurance.
It's tough to put a kid with a sprained ankle on a Segway.
You see what happens in the Philippines on motorcycles? Families, 6, 7 people on a motorcycle. You saw the pictures, right?
There you
You gotta have fun, you gotta have fun,
We
why
gotta-
bother?
yeah, we gotta have
That's
some
right.
Problem solved.
So with
But
that,
it's real, that's real money, that's $60,000.
as distasteful as it is, I'd like to make a motion to.
Can you just, wait, can I just ask,
Sure.
what is it that you mean that we lose it from the government if we do participation
When we pay
fees?
$170,000 to our real estate taxes, we get a tax deduction for it. Federal government,
Right.
33% tax rate, federal government, we get a check back from the federal government. If you pay it separately, I don't think there's a defensible way to take a tax deduction as a Schedule A deduction.
Okay, I see what you're saying, right.
So I'd like to make a motion that, and we're going to be able to discuss it before I ask for a vote on this, but the motion would be to institute participation fees, add back the FTE for $60,000 for the high school,
For a total of 4.0.
correct,
Okay.
and
Just clarify.
also accept these reductions. I'll look for a second and then also open it for discussion.
Second?
Discussion?
Do you want me to quantify what that would be at now?
Yeah, if
Having
you would.
those reductions and adding back the FTE brings
Certainly.
the non-special ed and security budget down to 2.72 and the total budget to 4.53.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
As distasteful as it is there any discussion on it?
I mean, different from what we just
Yeah,
had.
different from what we just
By
had.
incorporation, by reference, and everything we
Yes.
just said will be included as the discussion points.
Yeah.
For the record, we must be being taped, so.
Yes.
I don't know if it's appropriate. Yeah, I think the administration is looking for, and Gary talked earlier about some direction or ideas. And I look at the sheet, your super graphic, your whatever, and in the building blocks that drove the increases in the budget, once you get past the first 2 or 3 items, it's nits and gnats, trying to find anything there. But I look up at the top, at the block above, and equipment purchases projected for the incoming budget are $1 million, a lot of which is in tech, okay? And it's down slightly from last year, which means we spent $1 million last year on equipment. And we probably spent $1 million the year before that on equipment. And I've got to think, yeah, other than the payroll, there aren't big chunks for us to look at to really affect any economies or savings or whatever. But I guess, do we need to keep spending $1 million a year on equipment in the school system? I'm just trying to, and I'm looking just at big numbers that we're spending, that we're budgeting.
Right.
There's just some opportunity in that line item, either to approach the equipment, what we're buying differently, to find new ways of procuring the equipment differently. I mean, I just don't know. But there aren't many big chunks other than payroll. And I think we've already said that payroll is not one that we really are locked in, and there's not much we can do about it. Because you get below the top 2 or 3 items in your building blocks, and there's just, it's pennies here and pennies there, and a few dollars here and a few dollars there. And we could spend hours discussing how we go about doing something there, but $1 million a year in equipment, every year. Somebody,
Ken and Matt, can you guys figure out how to answer that?
Well, at least the technology, a lot of our money is tied up in technology leases. So the actual new spending, we're actually below last year's levels in equipment spending. And the biggest portion, probably somewhere in the neighborhood, and I can certainly look up exactly, 160 to 175,000 is a new lease for the computer equipment. The reason why I'd be really reluctant, and I would really strongly recommend not doing that, is that we're replacing computers that are coming off lease. They become real difficult to repair. And right now, I'm getting kind of nervous about making sure we have bandwidth and reliable equipment for all this testing. And then the testing this year doesn't count. But let's say we take the year off the lease, then next year when the test counts, we're going to have 435 computers off lease that are a slower processor.
right, so a lot of this is driven then by the new Common Core testing standards, is what you're saying. Is that your
Yes,
rationale?
but we're actually spending less than last year. We're not spending.
Yeah, we're spending 19,000 less in total
Right.
of that line item. But it's
Right,
still $1 million this
But if you
year.
look at my budget, a lot of it's tied up in salary
Right.
too.
Mhm.
It's not,
Wait, that wouldn't be in the equipment line?
Salary
item,
would
though.
be in the equipment
Yeah.
line. We've got $1 million in equipment. And it doesn't break out what is tech, it's equipment for other things. And tech
Well,
is a big portion of it.
In the building blocks, in the front section of your budget book, it shows that technology purchases in the 13-14 budget were about $870,000, and it's going up by $2,600.
Okay,
So about $872,000 is technology purchases.
So that 985 basically is technology.
Right.
Okay. Not equipment purchases. That really should be classified then as technology. It should fall to the technology bucket, or a big 90% of it.
Yeah, but I think your point is so well taken, Mr. Chairman. When you look at the building block chart at the bottom, relative to the 175 figure, you look at salary and benefits and you're at 195.
Exactly. Yeah.
With all these other contractual responsibilities that we have.
Yeah, I'm just trying to find a way, because look, if I had my way, I'd give you, another $2, $3, $4 million on top of what's here to really make things, to make you happy, really, whatever. But you can't do it. And I'm looking at ways, how can I rationalize and justify, and how can I sell and be supportive of this? And that we've done everything that we can possibly do to tighten it, to really scrutinize everything we're spending, every dollar, because this is taxpayer dollars that are given to you to spend. And if I just need to get comfortable that you've done everything possible to make sure that it is done prudently and well thought out, as absolutely positively necessary. I can get comfortable with that, then we take this forward and move on. I'm ready to go. And that's really the question. You tell me you have, good. Okay. Or are there more stones to look under, more rocks to turn over, perhaps? Good. And every dollar helps. Okay.
It's out of the budget book, just take a peek at that relative to most of the million.
Oh, yeah, I know.
Well, not a lot of backs on it, was it?
No, I went and tried to build it up, and it can't do that, yeah.
Yeah. So, the motion's on the table. Any other comments or discussion?
Well, with that motion, if at some point we get to a point where we cannot go with the 4.0 FTE and it has to be reduced back down to the 3.0, would we then be able to revisit?
Yes, all we're voting on right
Okay,
now
I just want
is
clarity.
giving the administration concrete guidance on what to bring to us at our next Board of Ed meeting,
Okay,
so that it will be the foundation of what we'll vote on and then take to the Board of Finance.
right.
The second the Board of Finance starts to evaluate our budget, all gloves are off, all previous conversations are off the table, everything's back open. But we
Right.
have to have something concrete to take to the Board of Finance.
Gotcha.
And if we vote one way today, can we vote another way on the 6th?
That's
Yes.
what I was
Oh,
gonna say, too.
on the 6th,
Oh,
I wouldn't think that that would carry the
So you're
situation.
really asking us to vote, this is the vote for the 6th.
Unless something changes between now and then, it essentially is that.
Well, there are going to be other points, as Mr. Likely just said, that as we go through the process, we'll come back and say, here's, an adjustment that we've been asked to make. I mean, the Board of Finance, by law and by statute, doesn't have a line item veto over our budget. They obviously set the mill rate, and that then we have to make the decisions with what we can live with. So we will be coming back we're asked, they can identify where they think there are efficiencies that we might find. And part of it is that we respond to whatever questions they have about it. This will be your budget that we want you to feel comfortable with.
We will also have further discussion on the 6th, because Laura obviously is not here tonight. And that's understandable. We haven't spoken with her about it, so I don't know where she'll come down. So, with
Call the
that,
question.
call the question. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Right.
All opposed? Duly noted.
On a tax efficiency matter, so everyone understands, we're voting the same way, because you want to spend the same amount of money that I want to spend for the
But in a
community.
different way.
I'm
Right,
just
but in a
saying that I'd
different way.
like the federal government to send us $60,000.
we'd all.
Yeah.
So I want to be $60,000 ahead.
Yeah.
But we're not arguing about the spending.
No, I know.
You know, something I'd like to point out, the chart that's included in the answers to the board's questions, Wilton's increases over the last 5 years, 2.82, 1.75, 3.5, 1.15, 1.19. So the last 5 years have been very lean. And then, Chris, I think you raised the question at our last board budget workshop, at what point do we start doing damage to the school system by failing to spend on it? And I know that 4.5% increase is a significant increase. It's the highest we've seen in years, and ultimately, who knows where we're going to end up with the Board of Finance. But, I've looked at this exhaustively, and I think it's money well spent. I think it's a good investment in what we're trying to accomplish with the children. And I think it's justifiable, given that we've had some very lean years over the past 5 years.
I think you make a good point. And it begs the question, I could run the math, but Ken, I'll ask you to run the math on this same grid to see over this 5-year period what the differential is and what we taxed Wiltonians versus what our neighboring towns did, because that will speak to the mill rate gap. Unless, of course, there's additional spending happening someplace else in town that offsets it.
Say that again, what we taxed versus other towns?
What I'm asking for is for you to run out the numbers and look at essentially what our increases were in total over the 5 years compared to the other towns.
Okay.
So that we can then, assuming the rest of the towns spent similarly in their Board of Selectmen deliberations, we can show that we're making an effort to close that mill rate gap in Wilton. And that's a good message back to the town.
Well, you can see the numbers, right? We've
Right.
certainly done better than Darien, better than New Canaan,
Right.
and better than Westport in the sense that we have increased our school budgets less. Now, is that a good thing?
Oh, that's a great
That's
question.
not clear to me, it's a good thing.
Well, and again,
Right.
I think that's a really important point, because I think they have made investment in the program development. They've made more investments in technology, certainly. They've made more investments in having curriculum time in the summer, professional learning, opportunities, coaching models that have, so I mean, they have been able to do more.
Chris, I have two things before you.
Sure.
Just
Yeah,
before
so
you
I
close.
credit
No,
that.
yeah, I'm not going to close.
Okay.
Because I have,
You got a couple
I did pose a question to both Bill and Warren yesterday via email about the fact that our town has two levers like any organization. We have revenue and expenses. And right now, we're all fighting over the same nickel because revenues aren't going up. So what can we do to work collectively to try to affect the revenue lever, knowing that the school district represents the greatest jewel of Wilton? And to your point, as we continue to cut the budget, we're effectively cutting the R&D of any good manufacturing facility. So we need to have that level of conversation. I know you have to head off because I have to follow you in a few minutes.
Thank you.
You had a couple of points?
I wonder whether we could have, so we had questions posed, and I think Bob had some information that he was referring to.
Right, we will get that to you.
That would be nice to have. There are also, because I didn't take notes, because I figured we could have it. There are also some questions I think we posed that were not addressed, not answered. And some other time we can follow up on those. They were more longer-term hypothetical questions that would start to ask or answer the question that Christine posed is, you know, what is the impact? What has the impact been on the quality of education given our spending? And if we continue on a particular path over the next 5 years, you know, what can we really expect? So I was looking for some more longer-range forecasts and some more sensitivities around what happens to quality of education if we spend more or less than what we've been spending. Because in a conversation around changes in spending presumes that the base spending is the right amount. And it's not yet clear to me that I can tell you I'm confident that the amount we're spending is the right amount. Maybe it's too much, maybe it's too little. But when you presume, when we talk about percentage increases all the time, you're presuming then, right, your anchor spending is the optimal or the appropriate amount, and not reach that conclusion.
Any other thoughts before I close? Motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye. See, we got unanimity there.
It's been a good conversation, I appreciate it.
My commentary, passion commentary was right towards the more than ass, not too bad.
Tomorrow, by the way, John Chambers is going to join us.
Oh, is it? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's 8 o'clock.
My office 8 o'clock, right? Yeah. We will have breakfast.
Oh, nice, thank you.
You're not.
We always have breakfast for you guys. Because a well-fed Board of Ed is a happy Board of Ed.
Well, to be clear, it's not the Board of Ed, it's the Superintendent Search Committee.
Well, that's right, because we have Gil and Karen.